I had the pleasure of chatting with Brandon R. Nicholas, who directed the documentary short Miss Honey, the Catsuit. The film was selected for the Black Alphabet Film Festival, which takes place in Chicago October 11th through the 13th. Visit the website blackalphabet.org to secure your tickets. Now, stay tuned for the interview.
All right, so before we discuss your incredible documentary, Miss Honey the Catsuit, I want to talk about your journey into filmmaking.
Um,
How did you come to love the craft of filmmaking?
so I think that probably started in college. I originally went to school for broadcast journalism because my grandmother was like, "Oh, you have the personality to be on TV, blah blah blah," and I believed her. And in some ways, I probably really do. But I went to Morgan State University in Baltimore, and I interned at like a local news station. And while I was there, I realized that I don't want to work in news, but I do still want to tell stories. So I think between graduating and like meeting my now husband, realizing that like I can tell stories that I care about in the ways that I want to tell them by making documentary films. And then I think the more we like produced work together, the more I really got focused on like what type of stories that I'm very interested in telling, which is just like, Black, queer, and trans stories that help us expand our understanding of what it is to be Black, queer, and trans for us. Very much on a journey of like pleasure and like reclaiming what it is to be Black and queer.
Okay. And so I love that you just said that. So, why are Black queer stories important to you?
That's a good one. Because the to you makes it so much more specific. Because somebody can just give Black queer stories are important because da da
Yeah.
da representation. I mean, I do think representation is actually at the root of whatever I end up saying. I think it's important to. I think Black queer and trans stories are important to me because I think about younger Brandon when he was growing up. And like I don't know what age difference, like what your age is compared to mine, but like I was growing up, baby gay Brandon was coming up in an age where there was no social media. Like baby gay Brandon existed before AOL dial up, right? Um Saying that to say, growing up, not having that many people who I can identify with just by like looking out on, like on my block or whatever. Young Brandon had such a hard time existing and like figuring him own himself out. He often felt very invisible and unheard. And so I often think like, what would my younger life had been like if I had access to the things that like we kind of take for granted now because we are in a beautiful saturation of Black, queer, and trans storytelling. What would younger Brandon had thought or felt of himself? How would he have navigated life at whatever years old if he'd have seen like anything that's being made now? So I think that is like really the importance of Black queer storytelling for me is to like honor like baby gay me and not even just the work that I make. I think just the work that is being made in general. And like what I will also say to that is I really do appreciate all of the like independent Black queer and trans filmmakers because we are able to create without the like white gaze and without the like the fingerprint of the industry trying to make whatever very niche, very unique to us story palatable for everybody because we know at the end of the day it's all about the bottom dollar, right?
Yes.
We're like indie filmmakers, we don't necessarily have that burden. We can tell whatever. I can cuss, right? We can tell whatever stories that we want to and not have to be burdened by like what is this like white producer going to say, or like what is this non-Black queer producer going to say, and like I can just create and know that like folks who have a similar lived experience will see themselves reflected and felt in the work that is made. So yeah, shout out to all the indie Black LGBTQ creatives out there because we are doing the work.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And so now I am curious, Moi Renee, and actually I went to your Twitter page because I used to always say moi Renee, but it's
Same.
like Moi Renee.
Yes, same.
And so, what excited you about Moi Renee to tell this particular story?
What excited me about doing a doc around Moi Renee was, I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, just knowing, like today, knowing that there was a person who existed in the late 80s, early 90s, who was their full self, who could walk around like outside in Flatbush. And like, I don't know how much you know about New York, especially like Flatbush back in the day, but like it definitely, New York was not the most welcoming place, especially like the Black Caribbean neighborhoods within Brooklyn, like Flatbush, Crown Heights,
Okay.
Understanding that Caribbean islands are very homophobic anyway, that also like migrated to the Caribbean areas of Brooklyn. So knowing that in Flatbush, Moi Renee would come outside, and these are like things that I discovered from speaking to elders. But knowing that Moi Renee would come outside broad daylight in like some poom poom shorts, like whatever outfit that he crafted that day, because he was very creative in that sense, and not give a and like you can try me, and I'm gonna try you back, and I might also be and again, I just think like, if young Brandon had seen Moi Renee on the street just being right, like what would he have felt on the inside? Now imagine, like for so many people that's like, oh my gosh, like the first time I seen like Beyonce, the first time I seen like RuPaul, like these people made me like expand in my mind on like what actually is possible and what I could be. So I imagine like, yeah, if I just seen Moi Renee like out on the block when I was spending summers in New York with my dad, like who? I mean, granted, I'm here now, but like, what would younger Brandon's life have been like? So I think that actually excited me to know that like at a time when you were very much still being beaten and killed, which isn't to say it's not happening now, right? But to know like the lengths at which homophobia's aggression was actually made tangible during that time, to know that like even in the midst of all of that, somebody chose to still be themselves. I think that is actually like, for me, really I hold so much respect and reverence for Renee for being able to do that, because like, I mean, I think with each generation we get a bit better. Like, I think the baby gays that are existing now, they get to come out of the womb being full. Whereas like, we actually had to work up to that point. And so just knowing that like somebody was just like, I'm going to pioneer this and do what I want for me, it is amazing.
I love what you said about being your authentic self. I cannot imagine, like, I'm from Florida, so and I'm from a very ultra conservative part of Florida. And so I left for that reason. I also respect the people that came before me, because I know that we rest on the shoulders of giants, and that their ability to just be themselves made it easier for us. So I love that.
And it's also like, yes, Black folks weren't always the most accepting in many ways. They still aren't non-queer Black folks. But for me, it's also like what I guess fascinates me. This, I guess, is a second part to your previous question. What also fascinates me, or rather, reframing, my initial introduction to the story was just like my curiosity of like, who is this person beyond this like YouTube video? And I remember seeing like the video in college, and like me and my friends, we keyed at it because like, love why down, like the video is somewhat comical in today's standards, right? Like so many of the comments give, oh my gosh, I remember saying this and laughing, blah blah blah, this is so funny, the dances are so tacky, blah blah blah, whatever. But like knowing that this person had a whole life outside of this very one moment, and like knowing how much of Black, queer, and trans culture has been erased or has not been told, because so many of our like ancestors and elders are focused on like survival and not archival, that like so many stories really do go undiscovered. So I mean, like in figuring out the makings of the Miss Honey of it all, because I think that was initially my way in, was like, let me do like an unsung, Because I wanted to do like an unsung of like several folks. Like Moi Renee was at the top, and then there was also a Baltimore club DJ named Tony at the time, like Miss Tony, and I wanted to also tell his story. But like Moi Renee was actually always the first for me, so I was like, I'm going to do this unsung. And then as I was speaking to the folks who knew Moi Renee, just like discovering like the wealth of personality that he had, and like how his simple presence made everybody that like I revere now who exist in New York, like a Douglas Says, like Elise Soldier, like so many other folks. They are where they are in some ways because of like literally just meeting Moi Renee out in the street or out in the club. And so like wanting to now do my due deals as a storyteller to show that like this person, as like audacious as they are, is more than this green wig, is more than this catsuit, is more than this like loose hip like track bravado. Like they were a full human who really ate up the streets and ate up the clubs.
Yeah. For anyone who hasn't seen the documentary Miss Honey the Catsuit, can you describe what it's about for them?
Yes. Miss Honey the Catsuit is a short proof of concept for a feature doc that I'm working on. Miss Honey the Catsuit specifically focuses on Douglas Says, who is a fashion designer, ballroom icon. He's designed a lot of the outfits for the girls and within ballroom. Speaking to Douglas about how the Catsuit came to be and how him and Moi Renee came to be, and then ultimately how Moi Renee got to do the song Miss Honey on like, you know, live TV. So like while it is very much Miss Honey the Catsuit, it is like a twofold letter of love from me, holding space for both Moi Renee, a ancestor who showed us we stand on, and Douglas Says, an elder who is still living and breathing and deserves to be celebrated. So yeah, it's twofold for me.
For anyone that doesn't know Moi Renee, aka Miss Honey, can you describe their influence in ballroom, or just influence in kind of like nightclub culture in New York?
Yes. So what I will say about Moi Renee's impact is that Moi Renee was definitely in the clubs like you, and it's also like I just wish I was like my age now then, because it also sounds like culture was so much. I mean, even though like society wasn't as progressive, it seems like the club space, the club scene, especially like the clubs that Moi Renee was frequenting, were so accepting and progressive. Because I've been speaking to a lot of folks who knew like Moi Renee just in passing through the clubs, and it's just like, you know, like if Moi Renee wasn't hosting this night, you may not actually even go, because like Moi Renee was the party starter. Like Moi Renee will walk through the club, grab you, put you on the floor, like, baby, honey, why are you standing against the wall? You need to be on the floor. You did not come out here to hold up the wall. Come and get your damn life. You know, Moi Renee would give that to everybody. Like, I think the beauty of Moi Renee and like his impact was that and I think this is just me probably being redundant, was that like his presence gave you permission to be. And it didn't matter if you were actually straight or gay, male or female or otherwise, because so many of the folks who I've been like, who I interviewed were just like, you know, I'm very much a straight woman. We would go to these clubs and, you know, it would be like straight men here, gay men here, like everybody's just dancing. And it, you know, it's also like a love for like house music, house and dance music. And that like in itself is very much a unifier. So like Moi Renee was like definitely a very, like if there was like, you know, New York club scene, Hollywood Walk of Fame, Moi Renee would definitely have a star, and that star would be fucking massive, right? I think outside of the club scene, and this was something that I discovered in doing these interviews, was just like Moi Renee had hosted the first Latex Ball, and I was just like, I did not know that. So like it was also just really wonderful to hear that like Moi Renee even had a footprint within ballroom. Like I'm still like, of course, doing a lot of research. So I don't know, like I know Moi Renee was involved in the early stages. Don't know like if Moi was in the house or not, but just knowing that Moi Renee had like a footprint and ballroom was just like a nice cherry on top for me, because so much of how I create and plan to create and produce always wants to have, like, of course, Black, queer, and trans culture at heart, but also ballroom, because I think in ballroom is where I found myself. So like in all of the projects that I do, wanted to be able to have some level of like ballroom in it. So like, again, realizing that Moi Renee like hosted the first latex ball and used to host mini balls at these clubs was just like, oh, this is amazing. Like, again, things you don't know, because all you get to see is like this 2-minute clip on YouTube. I'm very thankful, and this is me kind of, I guess, going off. I'm very thankful that, like, I'm thankful for divine timing, because I think there's a world where like somebody could have wanted to do this documentary a few years from now, and there would be people who could give you the best insight, and they may not necessarily, like, be living, because so many of the folks who I'm holding space with now are elders. And I actually remember, so a quick backstep rather. The documentary originally started as a podcast episode. As I was saying, wanted to do an unsung for Black queer music artists. It originally started as an episode for my podcast, Let's Get Back to Queer. And at the time I was doing audio interviews, and I interviewed one of the backup dancers at the time, one of the only living people from like the performance. And then, and that was great, because I got to get a lot of insight, right? And it was just really wonderful for me to be able to actually talk to somebody who can actually recount that moment as like being on the stage. Of course, Douglas was there in the audience because he made the outfit, but like somebody who actually was one of the dancers was just really interesting. And his story was like, the story that he gave was powerful. He passed away 3 months before Renaissance came out. So he didn't even get to hear like Pure Honey. He didn't even get to hear like his friend being sampled and interpolated in this way by like, who we will say is like one of the biggest stars in the world, right? And that like broke my heart. Like I cried when like I had that realization that we'd only spoken like 2 or 3 times. But just to think somebody who knew Why so closely, like would go over his house and eat jerk chicken because Moi Renee was a bomb cook. Rice and peas and all these things, and like held so much space, to not hear like decades later, years later, like the fruits of your friend's labor, really broke my heart. Broke my heart. So I say all that to say I'm really appreciative for divine timing. I'm glad that I actually had this idea to do this in 2019, because if there was a world where like seeing Renaissance solidified it for me, then I wouldn't even have had him to interview. Because he'd already, became an ancestor. He'd already transitioned. So yeah.
Okay. So you brought up Renaissance. So there are countless individuals who didn't know who Moi Renee was. And because of Pure Honey, Twitter became like alive with all of these memes. And there, Beyonce teased visuals, or maybe she didn't tease it, but like maybe somebody leaked them. But there's a clip of Beyonce in like a green wig and 2 people, I think there are 2 people behind her, as like paying homage to Miss Honey. And so do you remember where you were when you heard Pure Honey, and like how did you feel?
I do. I was home. I was here. By the time that the track listing had leaked, and folks saw like all of the names, the elders and like the folks from like the New York clubhouse scene had already been like having conversations, and I'd been like into these groups. And like I've been like in communication with the person who produced the Miss Honey track. Right. So like when the album leaked, I forgot which one of them sent it to me, but somebody sent me that song in particular because they knew by this point they knew I was doing this documentary. I was so excited. I was like, I want to wait to hear the album, but you sent me this now, so I'm gonna listen to it now. And like for folks who know me, they know like I love a good bass moment. So like I have a really nice sound bar in my living room. So I was like, okay. I was like talking to my partner. I was like, D, somebody just shared Pure Honey with me. I'm about to listen to it. And I was like, do I want to do this whole like captured moment, and it's like, no, I really just want to like receive this for me, right? Played it, and I was like, okay, pure as cunt. The Kevins ate that. And coming from ballroom, I'm in the living room like, oh, bad bitches to the left and the right and in the middle. Okay, working. But and I'm also like, where's Miss Honey? Where's Moi Renee? Song is cute. And then I was like, and then it came. Now I literally got so teary-eyed. And like it is so mind-boggling to me. Maybe not really mind-boggling, but I am like quite often shocked at myself at how invested I am in Wah's life. Because like at this point, it feels like Wah is a friend of mine. Like I've held so much space with folks who knew Moi Renee, and just being able to hear like a lot of the like small personal stories. Like, oh, I remember this one time she shaded me because of what I had on, or like she would cook for me, or she would make this outfit, or we stole this, or we did that. We went in here, like all of these things. Like I feel like I know Moi Renee. Like we have a very like it feels like we the good Judys. Like that would be my Kiki girlfriend. So to hear the Miss Honey part on Pure Honey, it actually felt like my friend at this point was on Beyonce's song. So I was very emotional, and I definitely messaged. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this song is cunt! I can't wait for everybody to hear it." But also, it was just like thinking about what you were saying about the memes and things. I had already had my Google alerts set way prior to like Renaissance. Like once I knew that I was doing this story on Moi Renee, I was like, let me do my Google alerts, because I do that for a lot of things that I want to do projects on. Let me just do my Google alerts, so if something new does come up, I can like see it and have it. Baby, when that track listing came out, there were so many Google alerts. Moi Renee's been sampled on this. Moi Renee's been sampled on this. Like Honey Dijon, TS. Like I was just like, the floodgates are opening. I mean, and in that way, I will say, I am quite thankful for Beyonce. She does not know me from a hole in the wall, right? But I'm quite thankful for her for including Moi Renee on the album, because in many ways, which is also really unfortunate, but in many ways it like further solidified the urgency to like tell this story, right? Because now it's just like, here we are as a very big but very small community. Here I am wanting to tell this story about somebody who like outside of like the LGBTQ community, a lot of folks wouldn't know and probably would have no real interest in, like, wow, who was that? But like, Beyonce, by way of, whoever produced the song, provides her stamp of like, yeah, like here's this person that just like elevates Moi Renee's social capital in that way. So now it's just like, hey, I've been doing this project for some years now. Give me money. Help me find. I mean, because Beyonce has, well, rather Renaissance specifically has made this process much easier. I would love to say Beyonce made this process easier. I'm like, if anybody ever knows anybody at Parkwood, please like tell her that this documentary exists, because that would be great. But Renaissance had like Moi Renee being on Renaissance has definitely made this journey a bit smoother.
Okay.
For sure.
I'm curious because I'm learning a lot of things about Moi Renee that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a place that has like archived photographs, clothing, the catsuit, video that they can go to experience Moi Renee's life?
Yes, but no. So this is like, I guess, again, where it gets like tricky and nuanced, because there are pockets of archives that exist. Many of them are like personal archives. So there is a ballroom archival, like there's somebody in ballroom who's like had a decades long history of like archiving ballroom since like the 90s, I believe.
Okay.
We met early this year, and I told him like, I'm doing this documentary on Moi Renee, because we both have a shared background in ballroom, I realized Moi Renee hosted the first latex ball, and he literally is like, oh, I have so much footage of Moi Renee at the balls. I'm just like, okay, great, this is amazing. Can we be best friends so I can let me license this footage. So a lot of it actually is like personal archive. I will say, Douglas Says, who is the fashion designer of the catsuit, who was the primary interview in Miss Honey the Catsuit, he had his work exhibited in the Newark Museum earlier this year. The Catsuit was on display, as was the rest of the his cutout collection. So that was actually really beautiful to like walk through and see. One, because like having a good relationship with Douglas now, to be able to see him being celebrated after all of the work that he's done over the years. And like him to receive his flowers now while he can, you know, tangibly grab them and smell them is actually beautiful. And by proxy, being able to see like this outfit that has been imitated and replicated time and time again, because Miss Honey, because Moi Renee wore for the song of Miss Honey, is also just like a celebration of Moi Renee. And I don't know if I can say the specifics, but I do believe it will be in other museums soon.
Okay. I love that. And so when we're talking about Douglas Says, I remembered that you were working on the longer project.
Yes.
And I remember reading on Twitter that the actor who was supposed to play Moi Renee, something happened, and then your partner stepped in.
Yes.
So are you free to talk about the larger project, and when can people see that?
Yes, I can. So I mean, and also just to like expand on that, on the story, I filmed the short film and the feature. I mean, and because in many ways they are two different projects. Though the short feeds the feature. I filmed the short in one weekend, and in that weekend I filmed part of the feature, which was the reenactment of the Miss Honey song. I had someone who in my mind looked closely like Moi Renee, who also was like a Black queer Caribbean person. Had cast like, and both were very much excited. Like we were on the phone, like, okay, which version of the song do I need to know the lyrics for? Because you know there's like 1,000 different versions on SoundCloud. He had a night, went clubbing, woke up late. I get it. It's New York, whatever. I mean, I very much was over it, but again, I get it. I actually was going to do it. I was like, all right, this is just the universe telling me that I need to step further into it. And I'm like, it'll be a great story for me to be like, oh, well, you know, I was the one doing all the things. The wig did not fit my head. Not even because of all of my hair. It just would not fit my head. And I was like prepared to shave my face and everything. Like I was already putting on the catsuit, but I was like, oh, okay, yeah, the wig doesn't fit me. So we're screwed. And then my partner was like, I will do it. I will go in the corner and learn the lyrics and learn the movement and shave my face. Super duper thankful and grateful for him. So the feature doc, which I'm tentatively calling Miss Honey, the Bati Boy Who Fought Back. Very much a long title, but every word serves a purpose. Miss Honey, the Bati Boy Who Fought Back, is one part like Moi Renee's story, larger than the scope of Miss Honey the Catsuit, like who Moi Renee was, his journey from Jamaica to the States, going from Philly to New York, and all of that. You know, very much a chronological biography of this very important person. And Moi Renee is actually the roots and the seed of this documentary. But from there, really talking about having a conversation around homophobia and transphobia within the Caribbean islands, because myself, my paternal side of the family is from Trinidad. So like also having very much firsthand experience of like familial relatives actually being very like, Brandon, we love you, but like we accept you, or rather we tolerate you, but don't be so around us. Experiencing that firsthand, and also like moving to find freedom, right? We both moved to New York to find some level of freedom and liberation where we can be our full selves. So like having a conversation around homophobia within Caribbean culture, the things that are being done now to push back against that narrative, like the work that is being done specifically in Jamaica and the other Caribbean islands. And also just like the relevancy of Moi Renee and the New York house and club scene, because I feel like so much of like 80s, 90s club conversations, the conversations around like, like nightlife around that time actually doesn't do a good job of including Moi Renee. Where like I feel like, clubs wouldn't be what they are tracks wouldn't even be what they are if Moi Renee hadn't even did Miss Honey.
Yeah.
You know, folks love to erase us out of history or just like not to include us in conversation. So wanting to really expand that gap of knowledge for Moi Renee while also really having a very real but like entertaining conversation around homophobia within the Caribbean islands and what's being done to push back against that. Because it is very much still like a real thing. Like I think there was a 2022 study that was actually done in Jamaica where like 80% of folks had said like 80% of the folks who were studied, who were in the study, LGBTQ folks within Jamaica have reported some level of physical violence at the bare minimum. I don't want to be wrong. So I'm going to say 80% of folks had experienced some level of violence. I do think the bare minimum might have been like verbal violence, but at least like most of the queer folks in Jamaica have experienced some level of violence. And I think as you say, whatever your next question is, I'll pull up because I know I have the stats so I can actually be a bit more accurate. Yeah. But all that to say, like, you know, homophobia within the Caribbean islands is still very much alive and thriving today. And like, we need to kill that beast. And it's so wild because when I woke up, I was on the film's Instagram account today and somebody had sent me a clip of like Spice, the Jamaican artist, talking about like homophobia within Jamaica. And she's like, baby, everybody's gay. Pay it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing now, but she's like, baby, everybody's gay. We're all sucking. Pay it. And I just really thought that was nice to hear such a prominent Jamaican artist actually speak up in support of all of the folks in Jamaica who are very much literally fighting for their existence and fighting for their culture. And I'll just read it. So again, I'm not wrong. 54% of people reported knowing someone from the LGBTQ community who had died violently or was killed in the last 12 months due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. 83% of people highlighted the key issues faced by LGBTQ people in Jamaica is violence due to prejudice and discrimination. 73% of people expressed fear of being assaulted, threatened, or murdered. So like, again, this is just 2022, 2 years ago. So I can only imagine like how different it is now versus then. What I aim to do with the power of this feature is to get those numbers down. Like I know just me being one person, this film just being one thing and like the ethos, the ecosystem that is life may not have such a big ripple, but I do think this film will have a significant enough ripple to at least have the conversation where these numbers can start to go down because it is actually quite insane that you can like be killed or beat the hell up for literally just being yourself.
For anyone watching this, there is a organization in Canada called Rainbow Railroad that if you are in danger, they can help you safely arrive to Canada.
Oh, that is beautiful.
And to get citizenship. And things might be changing in Canada now, like how things are changing across the world with like people trying to push immigrants out, unfortunately. But a lot of Black queer people from the Caribbean have actually found a new life in Canada.
I love that.
I would love to talk about Douglas Says for a second.
Okay.
And I'm curious about the catsuit, the cutouts. Why does Douglas ever talk about like the specific colors, shapes, cutouts?
I love how you asked that question. I live. No, I really do. The interesting thing before I answer the question is like, me and Douglas in some ways are neighbors. Like he is like maybe a 10-minute, I mean, not technically, like I can't go walk like next door, but he's like a 10-minute bike ride from me. Which allows me a certain privilege of having access to him, which is to say I've interviewed him several times. Like I interviewed him once for the podcast, and that was a beautiful 3-hour interview. And then I interviewed him again on camera. Like Douglas himself is a wealth of history and knowledge. Like this man is so special in ways that like my brain language will not allow me to articulate in this present moment. But Douglas is really a gem to the community. And in so many ways is like, underrated. But like Douglas has like a wealth of archive, not even just about like him and like all the work that he does. He has so much archive on just like anything that he's touched, anybody he's come across. Like he has so much material, and so like that's why the first interview was like 3 hours, because it was like, oh, let me go in my closet and grab the shoebox so I can show you what I'm talking about. Saying all that to say, I interviewed him a few times, and it's just been and editing Miss Honey the Catsuit, the short, having the privilege of being able to like fill in some gaps that I didn't get from the video interview with the audio interview, because like when he actually talks about the Catsuit, he does a more entertaining job of it in the audio. Douglas is a storyteller. Like,
Yeah.
I think just listening to Douglas talk is like fascinating and like wonderful. Yeah. The concept of the cutout collection was inspired because like somebody's like foot had like snagged the fabric, and it was just like, all right, well, I'm not just gonna throw this garment away. Yeah. Like, I'm creative and like I'm a wonderful, dope fashion designer. So let me actually just cut this hole out, use this fabric and put a hole here. And you know what? Now that I'm on it, let me just cut this hole out, put a hole here. And again, placing it in like what he says in the short is like, you know, everything's placed very strategically. There is no titty out, there's no out, like everything is placed in a way where you get a little bit of skin, but it's not giving, you know, it's not giving porn. Like you're not getting areola. I'm sorry, I'm really vulgar. You're not getting any of the things. So I mean, so yeah, and that, I mean, yeah, just him talking about the cutout collection is always nice, because it feels like every time like we converse around the collection, or even just anything that we already talked about, it seems like there's always something that he remembers, and I'm just like, oh, this is great. Wait, can we say this again on you know, on record? Yeah. But yeah,
I love that. I did not know that Douglas was behind the Catsuit. I know of Douglas because of his work with Tracy Africa.
Yes,
I know they had a very beautiful relationship.
Yes,
and so I was pleasantly surprised to learn that Douglas created the iconic Catsuit.
Yes, and what's also really quick, because you just reminded me, and I think I did share this with Douglas, just like how the universe works. The end of 2019, my partner had a play called 1 and 2. Douglas and Tracy both came to see the show. I was still working on the podcast. I think I'd already had the idea for you know, the unsung on Moi Renee, but I don't think I'd gotten as far yet as like figuring out like the who's or whatever. So like having, and like I knew of Douglas, like being in ballroom, like I knew of Douglas. So like even just seeing him, I'm like, this is like a walking legend, like a living walking legend. Was so nervous to even introduce myself, because I'm just like, oh, I just want to breathe this person, like him and Trace. Like, I just want to breathe their air for a second, because like these are like living legends within our community. And then like several months later, just been like, hey, who knows somebody who knows Moi Renee? And then Lee Soldier, who was like a wonderful connecting thread just in New York City in general, was like, oh, talk to Douglas. And I was like, okay, reach out to Douglas. I was like, hey, you know, we'd actually kind of met a few months ago. And he was like, oh, I actually live in New Jersey too. I'm like, oh, wait, you live like right down the street. This is like so crazy. So yeah, all that to say, you know, I think the universe was actually putting everything in path for me.
Okay.
As he would actually, reframing it, as he would often say, when you see the short, how spirit led us to get to each other.
Okay. I love that. What is one of your, like, I feel like when you are an artist, you have to consume a lot of art. You have to be around art. What is one either book, image, film that you return to that inspires you?
Ooh, that I return to.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because my knee-jerk answer may not answer that, but like I quite often rewatch Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. There's something really rich about Wesley Snipes' Noxeema Jackson that like lives deeply in my spirit. I do find myself revisiting that a lot. But I think I don't know if it's so much like a piece of art that I revisit that like kind of fuels me, if I'm understanding the question correctly. I really think it's like community. I think just being around like my people, like queer and trans folks, specifically Black and brown queer and trans folks within like the ecosystem of New York and abroad, constantly fuels me, because we are quite always having conversations or just existing in ways that like continues to expand my already big imagination even further. I don't think there's ever a time when I'm not in the presence of like a group of people and I'm just like, young Brandon could not envision being here today. So I think for me, it really is just like the art that is like our existence. I'll frame it that way. Like the art that is actually being Black, queer, and trans, like being a fucking femme queen, being like a butch queen, like the art that is being us is actually what fuels me. And that's what I always come back to, which is community.
I love that.
I ate that.
I love that because queer history, especially Black queer history, is not taught in schools.
Yes.
And so everything that I learned about my Black queer ancestors, elders, has been within community.
Yes.
And now social media. And so I love that answer. I am obsessed with Swain, who is considered the first drag queen.
Drag queen. Mm-hmm.
And I love how Swain created the term drag queen from watching, I think it was like parades, and how there were queens in the parade, and they adopted the term queen. And so social media has been such a blessing because I also get to be in the community on social media. Because I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, like we didn't have balls. And so I would literally watch balls and ballroom community on YouTube. And I actually felt like I was part of the community. And I'm so thankful for people who realize that we should document this, because younger people will need to know who the icons and the legends were. And I am thankful for you for highlighting Moi Renee and allowing younger generations to know exactly who they were. So thank you.
Thank you for that, because it is, as you were talking, I just was thinking, and this is not at all to be reductive, right? But for like every Black LGBTQ ancestor that we actually do know and who is like exalted, or even just like, you know, brought up in many of the conversations, there are like 13 other people who did something similar, and maybe in some ways had actually done more. But like, again, history, oral tradition, like things get lost. So like, while I am very grateful and honored to be able to tell Wa's story, I am always thankful and grateful for all of the archival like storytellers and just all of the archival, like all of the archivists that exist who are doing their due diligence to actually tell and broaden the wealth that is Black queer and trans history. Like, right, like who, like the person who like made the House of Swan, like who did the House of Swan book, all of that research, like greatly indebted. I don't know what links of like bullshit you had to go through to like get that, like to tell this story, to inform us about it. But thank you, you know, like for all of the folks who are just like unearthing Black, queer, and trans stories, histories, people, figure, cultures, like thank you. And us, like, because it's like we do a job that, you know, the I won't say the general population, that the people who pull the strings and hold the strings quite often do not care about, right? We're often doing this work with little money, and it's quite often a passion, like a, you know, a labor of love, a passion project. But we are so committed to expanding the wealth of what is our existence, and like really trying to highlight everybody who had any level of significance, right? Knowing that we are all very significant, but like anybody who had any level of significance, who made us breathing today in the ways that we are so much easier. I'm gratefully, like deeply indebted to them. And like, I think so much of our culture not even just like us as Black LGBTQ folks, just like us as a society, so much of our sheer existence will be all the better the more our stories are told. Because we know this, and I think I'm just saying it so if there is ever anybody who's watching this who doesn't know, like, we are literally the thing that moves like everything forward. We are what makes the earth rotate.
Yeah.
Around the sun or in space, like, we are literally like the entity that makes life happen.
Yeah.
There is no culture without Black, queer, and trans folks.
Yeah.
There isn't.
I honestly could chat with you for like hours, but I think this is a great place to end it. Thank you so much for chatting with me, and I can't wait for the world to discover Miss Honey, aka Moi Renee.